The royal family has gathered in Scotland for their annual summer break at Balmoral.
All different types of things, so furniture, ceramics, silver, and paintings like the ones we can see here.
Queen Elizabeth II spent her final days at her home away from home, Balmoral Castle, which has been a sanctuary really for the royal family since the days of Queen Victoria.
For years, it's been called the Queen's Peaceful Retreat. But now, maids aren't just quitting, they're fleeing. And the shocking reason why the palace is desperate to hide the truth. What really happened inside Balmoral Castle? Every morning at Balmoral, maids are forced to curtsy to empty rooms, even if the royal just walked out seconds ago. It's a bizarre 150-year-old tradition that's never been questioned, never been broken. But that's just where the madness starts. Vacuum cleaners? Forbidden. Instead, staff scrub the carpets on their knees for hours, working brutal 18-hour shifts for less than minimum wage. Speaking is off limits unless a royal addresses them first. One insider's review called the management toxic beyond repair, but it's what they uncovered behind the castle walls that made dozens walk out overnight. It all traces back to the summer of 1852, when Prince Albert secretly wired $32,000, about $4.4 million today, to buy Balmoral after spotting a rain-soaked property ad. He didn't even tell Queen Victoria. And within a few short years, they demolished the old house and replaced it with the granite fortress we now call Balmoral Castle.
Prince Albert bought it for Queen Victoria, his wife. Members of the royal family say it was a happy refuge for Queen Elizabeth, where she could get away from the rigors of royal life, where she could hunt grouse, fish.
But here's the question no one dares to ask. What exactly drove so many to leave that place in fear? Prince Albert didn't just buy Balmoral. He designed it like an obsession. He even sketched the clock tower himself, insisting every inch reflect his vision. Over time, the estate ballooned to a jaw-dropping 53,000 acres. That's bigger than San Francisco or Paris. It had everything: mountains, 150 buildings, its own power supply, even a 3-mile private railway built in 1866, just to secretly haul royal luggage out of sight.
According to the BBC, it's also where she spent much of her husband, Prince Philip's remaining years with him as well. CNN's Issa Soares has more on the Queen's beloved homeland.
But here's the twist. Balmoral isn't public property. It's owned personally by the royal family. So when they rent out cottages or sell deer from the estate, every penny goes straight into their pockets. Some MPs tried to raise questions in Parliament, but Edward VII shut it down, calling Balmoral their inescapable refuge. On the surface, it looks like something out of a Scottish fairy tale, white granite walls glittering against the hills. But that beauty hides a strange intensity. Albert personally oversaw every detail, from how the windows opened for perfect air to carvings of all 9 royal children etched above the doorway.
Most happy there. I think she really, really loves the Highlands.
Inside, there are 167 rooms, yet the hallways were deliberately built narrow, so the royal family would be forced to bump into each other more often. Creepy coincidence, or a design for control? Albert believed his strange design choices would somehow bring everyone closer, even the narrow halls and odd window placements. The clock tower, inspired by a German castle, was tuned to ring in E-flat so it wouldn't frighten the ponies. Yet not everyone was impressed. Locals mocked it, calling Balmoral a cold stone barn with delusions of grandeur. Still, the royal influence ran deep. Within just 2 decades, 80% of new Scottish country homes copied its style. Queen Victoria later romanticized it all, saying the place smelled like pine and freedom. But for the people working there, freedom was the last thing they had. When the royals descend on Balmoral, they bring an army of 150 staff. Gillies, cooks, horse handlers, and maids, each bound by a lifelong silence clause. Break it, and you're gone for good.
It's a lovely base for Granny and Grandpa to be, for us to come and see them up there when you just have room to breathe and run.
Some maids work 18-hour days, scrubbing hundreds of silver pieces and keeping over 50 fireplaces burning, consuming 60 tons of birchwood each season. Meals might seem humble, picnics by the river where the king washes dishes, but behind the charm lies a system of rigid control. Staff can't speak unless spoken to, and some are required to help kill one out of every 200 deer on the estate each winter. The cost of running this royal paradise? Over $3 million a year, mostly funded by renting out cottages and selling timber, all profits that stay within the royal family's private fortune. And yet once a year, the rules bend for one night, the Gillies Ball. Every September since 1858, workers and royals dance under the same roof. The king himself leads the first waltz, and even a dishwasher might find themselves spinning with a prince. Rumor has it Prince Philip once spiked the punch with gin to loosen everyone up. Princess Diana later described the night best, like a prom, if it were hosted by Downton Abbey. But with so much secrecy and ritual, one has to wonder, is Balmoral really a retreat or just a royal illusion? But even on the night of the Gillies Ball, the rules never really stop. Every detail screams hierarchy. Even the invitations are color-coded by class. Gold trimmed for the favored few, plain white for everyone else. When the clock strikes midnight, the royals quietly slip away, and every servant must bow in silence as they leave the hall.
For all the splendour and grandeur of royal residences, Balmoral was known as homey.
After 3 grueling years, a maid could climb the ladder to first housemaid for a raise of just $3,500. Meanwhile, male gamekeepers made $26,000 and worked half as many hours. The quiet resentment that brewed among the women wasn't spoken aloud, but it was always felt, what royal historian Patrick Thorncraft later described as, like standing in the cold, wearing silk gloves. And then there was the rule that shocked every newcomer. If a royal left a room and a maid entered moments later, she still had to curtsy to the empty air. It was said to honor the lingering spirit of royalty. During the 1987 Gillies Ball, maids performed this ritual 61 times in one night. Some bruised their knees so badly that bandages were handed out with their serving trays. One maid later said it felt like curtsying to ghosts, proof our dignity meant less than the rules. But the silence didn't last forever. In March 1988, a French magazine published a story that sent shockwaves through the royal household. It came from a young maid who had lasted just 8 weeks at Balmoral the previous summer. She'd been paid $10,000, more than she would have earned in 8 years, to reveal everything she'd seen behind those granite walls. She talked about private dinner rituals, whispered arguments, and even which royal dogs slept outside Princess Anne's door. Within 48 hours, the UK tabloids exploded with the story. For the first time, the silence inside Balmoral had cracked, and what spilled out wasn't loyalty or grace. It was the price of serving ghosts. Overnight, millions were reading secrets that were never meant to leave Balmoral's walls. The young maid's confessions painted a portrait both human and haunting. One story in particular captured hearts. In August 1987, during a formal dinner, a visiting guest accidentally drank from the finger bowl, mistaking the rose-scented water for soup. It could have been humiliating, but instead, the Queen and every royal at the table quietly copied him, lifting their bowls and sipping the perfumed water too. By the end of dinner, 17 bowls were empty. That silent act said more about grace than 1,000 speeches ever could. For a fleeting moment, the royals seemed kind.
Has described in his memoir, A Weekend at Balmoral, as a vivid combination of the intriguing, the surreal, and the utterly freaky.
But the maid's next story shattered that warmth. During Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's 1987 visit, she claimed the Queen refused to house her inside the main castle, sending her instead to a remote cottage on the far end of the estate, a spot staff nicknamed Siberia. The palace denied it immediately, insisting Thatcher always stayed in the castle. Still, people noticed she skipped the next morning's grouse hunt, fueling headlines of 2 powerful women locked in icy silence. And then came the glimpses of Charles and Diana. The maid described them as like teenagers in love, sneaking handholds in corridors, Charles fetching Diana's coat before picnics, Diana slipping quiet tips to young stable boys. But even that sweetness couldn't mask the brutal truth beneath it all. The maids serving them were earning just $75 a week, and some weeks they weren't paid at all. Breaks weren't requested. They were dictated by the sound of an old brass bell echoing through the halls like it was still the 1800s. When the story broke, the royal household erupted in fury. Lawyers were called, newspapers were threatened, and insiders were interrogated. But the damage was done. For the first time, the world had peeked behind the polished granite of Balmoral, and what it saw wasn't just royalty. It was a kingdom built on silence, sacrifice, and perfectly cleaned secrets. Within hours of the story leaking, the palace went into full-blown panic mode. A furious statement was released, calling it a gross breach of trust, and within minutes, heads were already rolling. An internal investigation was launched. Every one of the 348 staff members from the previous season was suddenly under the microscope. Overnight, new security rules were slammed into place. Fresh hires now faced brutal background checks and were forced to sign strict secrecy papers tied to the Official Secrets Act. The message was crystal clear: talk to the press and your royal career was dead. But behind all that polished protocol, the Queen herself was a walking contradiction. One maid recalled Christmas of 1990, when Her Majesty carefully folded up used wrapping paper and tucked it into an old dog treat tin, as if wartime thrift still ruled her diamond-filled palace. Another time, she saved a single lemon slice from her dinner plate, saying it would be perfect for trout tomorrow. Some staff found it endearing, others found it unsettling. After all, while the Queen was reusing wrapping paper, many of them could barely afford gifts of their own. And then there was Prince Philip, who turned royal dinners into his own twisted sport. In 1991, a young footman made the mistake of selling a story about a barefoot royal dance. He was fired on the spot. Since then, cameras have been completely banned, and anyone caught sneaking a photo is dismissed instantly. Still, for many workers, the Gillies Ball remains their one glimpse of equality, the only night they're allowed to call the king by his first name. Balmoral's isolation is no accident. Hidden deep in the Scottish Highlands and reachable only by a single winding road, it's long been the royal family's fortress of secrecy. It's where Queen Victoria's rumored relationship with her servant John Brown flourished far from prying eyes, where Edward VIII rehearsed his abdication speech, and decades later, where young William and Harry were shielded from the news of Diana's death for hours, so their grief could be managed. But the walls don't keep everything in. In 2019, a cleaner leaked photos of the royal children's private treehouse, prompting the palace to board up windows and ban all photography. Years before that, another ex-worker exposed unsettling details, like the Queen Mother's daily Dubonnet habit and Prince Andrew's bizarre demand for exactly 28 golf balls at all times. He was paid $90,000 for his story, before the palace sued him into silence. For a place built on privacy, Balmoral has seen its fair share of leaks and whispers. The question now is, what secrets are still buried behind those glittering granite walls? Now, even drones can't get near Balmoral. After a few close calls, sky fences were installed in 2024, turning the royal estate into something closer to a no-fly fortress. From the outside, it looks peaceful. Quiet stone walls, green hills, crisp air. But inside, life still runs on Victorian discipline.
Where pre-dinner drinks were, quote, true rocket fuel, and the Queen herself would do the washing up, Blair wrote. They put the gloves on and stick their hands in the sink. The Queen asks if you've finished. She stacks the plates up and goes off to the sink.
The youngest maids begin their day before sunrise, shuffling into the ancient kitchens by 6 a.m. to polish over 200 pieces of silver until they gleam. Breakfast is served by 8, followed by endless rounds of tea service, heavy kettles carried down cold, echoing corridors, careful not to wake the royal dogs. Lunch means peeling 18 kilos of potatoes, then rushing to change uniforms for afternoon tea at 4. After that comes the muddy boots from the royal hunts, each pair scrubbed spotless before nightfall. By the time the staff crawl to their attic beds at 9:45 p.m., they've worked 15-hour shifts straight. There's no overtime pay, just a haunting line printed in the old staff manual. Loyalty is its own reward. One former maid put it more bluntly, it's like giving your life to a shadow. And no one ever says thank you. Even technology has its limits here. Vacuum cleaners are still banned. Queen Elizabeth II reportedly hated the sound of them, so maids continue to scrub the carpets on their knees, just as they did a century ago. And as the royal silence stretches on, one can't help but wonder, how much of Balmoral's charm is tradition, and how much is control? Every morning at Balmoral, the silence starts early, and it's not out of respect. It's fear disguised as discipline. 2 maids drop to their knees at dawn, pushing tiny horsehair brushes across the carpet inch by inch. Just one hallway takes 45 minutes. By midday, their aprons are soaked with dust. By evening, their wrists ache so badly they can barely lift a fork.
Balmoral held a sentimental significance.
In 1990, even the head housekeeper admitted that banning vacuum cleaners added 9 extra hours of labor every day. But pay, not a penny more. Complaints were unthinkable. The castle sparkled for the royals, but beneath every immaculate rug was quiet exhaustion and unspoken pain. Speaking up was dangerous. In July 1986, one maid was dusting when she accidentally overheard Prince Charles whispering to Diana. Another servant hissed for her to act deaf. The next morning, a written warning appeared on her cot. The rule was simple and brutal. Never acknowledge royal speech. Do it twice, and you're fired. That also meant losing your $250 end-of-season bonus, a small fortune for someone surviving on servant wages. So staff learned to speak with their hands, passing silent signals during breakfast service, glancing down hallways where even a breath felt risky. Some later said Balmoral's corridors were quieter than any library, not from reverence, but from fear. And maybe that's the real royal tradition here, not the curtsies or the rituals, but the silence that keeps everything hidden. At Balmoral, every silence was survival. Everyone knew they were being watched by superiors, by tradition, by the weight of the crown itself. And yet, for all the loyalty demanded, the pay barely matched the pain. In 1983, a lower-level housemaid earned $18,000 before tax, only about $4,000 more than the average British worker, despite working 60-hour weeks and living full-time inside the castle. Many rooms still had antique toilets, so maids carried chamber pots up and down the corridors like it was still the 1800s. Every night at exactly 8:15, Prince Philip turned dinner into an interrogation. It wasn't just small talk, it was a firing line. How many grouse were shot today? Who's running off with the postmistress this time? He'd pepper the maids with questions until someone slipped up. One maid still remembers August 1985. She answered 11 questions in a row without blinking. Some called it playful banter. But for Diana, still new to royal life, it felt like surveillance disguised as dinner. She later confessed those evenings felt less like family time and more like tests she could never quite pass. By the summer of 1991, even the children were caught in the strange rhythm of palace life. 8-year-old William and 6-year-old Harry would hide vacuums, turning staff chores into royal pranks. Once, they hid a cleaner behind a tapestry, triggering a 42-minute search. Another time, they squirted mustard onto the ceiling, a stunt they'd seen their grandfather pull. Everyone laughed, but beneath the laughter, the air was thick with something darker. Just 2 days earlier, Charles and Diana had argued privately about separating, a conversation the maid overheard through the walls. The boys were playing, but the castle itself felt like it was holding its breath. When the maid first arrived in 1987, she was made to take an oath, not written but spoken, in a silent hall lined with stag heads. She promised to protect the family's secrets, no matter what, but loyalty only lasts so long. When she finally sold her story, she didn't just change her own life. She forced the palace to change its rules. By 1989, every new staff member was required to sign an official secrecy clause. The royal walls had ears, and now legal muzzles too. Even in the harshest conditions, the Queen's poise never slipped. After every grand event, she personally thanked each night staff member by name, a gesture that seemed gracious on the surface, but did little to thaw the reality upstairs. The attic bedrooms where the maids slept were freezing, literally. Until 1994, temperatures dropped to 4 degrees Celsius at night, and hot water only ran for 30 minutes each morning. During one storm in August 1992, when an iron fuse blew, the staff had to dry soaked sheets over massive stoves while wearing gloves. It wasn't until a 1995 audit quietly flagged the unacceptable living conditions that Balmoral finally upgraded the plumbing and handed out duvets. The maid liked to think her leaked words had something to do with that sudden burst of royal generosity. But as time went on, something strange began stirring behind the walls of Balmoral, and later, at King Charles's Highgrove estate. It wasn't the usual palace scandal splashed across tabloids. This was quieter, more unsettling. Between early 2024 and mid-2025, the entire gardening team at Highgrove fell apart. Out of 12 workers, only 1 remained. The rest simply walked away. No public fuss, no official statement. From the outside, the estate looked like paradise. But behind those immaculate hedges, something was deeply wrong. From the outside, everything at Highgrove looked picture perfect. Carefully trimmed hedges, immaculate flower beds, royal tours gliding past the lawns. But behind that manicured beauty was a pressure cooker few could survive. Gardeners were clocking up to 60 hours a week, maintaining 15 acres of themed gardens that hosted 40,000 visitors every year, all for about $22,000 a year. After taxes, that came to roughly £7.25 an hour. Royal grounds, minimum wage pay. The breaking point came on July 5th, 2025. One gardener tore his shoulder hauling 180 kilograms of compost, alone. Instead of proper sick pay, he was pushed onto basic benefits worth barely 116 pounds a week. 9 days later, nearly the entire team walked out. Then came the leaks. Internal emails revealed that King Charles often left handwritten notes in black ink, demanding absurd tasks, like pulling every single weed overnight or replanting 700 flowers before his return in just 3 days. On July 18th, the palace finally admitted something was off. A crisis team was quietly brought in to contain the damage, but those cracks in royal life weren't new. They'd just been papered over for decades. Way back in January 1983, a young maid named Fiona remembered freezing nights in Balmoral's attic rooms, a cramped 12-square-meter space with thin glass windows that let in the biting Highland wind. She and 2 others slept so cold their breath frosted the walls. Heaters weren't allowed. Management said they were a fire risk. In truth, it was easier to let the staff freeze than spend royal money on warmth. In 1987, staff were promised new, warmer dormitories by 1990, a promise that vanished like so many others behind palace walls. By the end of that decade, over a third of Balmoral's maids had quit. Then came 2024, and another betrayal that rocked the monarchy. After Princess Kate underwent surgery in January, someone inside the London clinic tried to access her private medical records. The news broke in March, and chaos followed. Investigators swarmed the hospital, warning that staff could face criminal charges and fines up to £17.5 million. 3 workers were immediately placed under review. For many, it was the most serious breach of royal privacy since the phone hacking scandals of the 2000s, a chilling reminder that even behind locked doors, nothing in royal life stays hidden forever. But breaches like that weren't new. Back in 1983, another insider, Stephen Barry, stepped into the spotlight. He joined royal service at just 17 and by 21 was already Prince Charles's personal valet, close enough to see the cracks forming behind palace walls. Stephen Barry knew the palace inside out, and not in the glamorous way the public imagined. He laid out Prince Charles's clothes each morning, pressed every kilt, even swapped his shoelaces daily. But in May 1983, Barry broke ranks with a shocking memoir titled In Royal Service. His revelations weren't scandalous. They were sobering. He revealed that royal valets earned just $6,000 a year, barely half what a London bus driver made, despite being on call around the clock. For exposing that quiet injustice, he was fired within months. 3 years later, in 1986, he died of AIDS-related complications. His death barely made the papers, but his honesty left a mark. It revealed the class divide quietly pulsing beneath Balmoral's gold-trimmed surface. Even those who played by the rules couldn't escape the fallout. Take Angela Kelly, the Queen's trusted dresser and confidant. In 2019, she became the only palace aide in history to publish a book with the Queen's explicit approval. The other side of the coin seemed harmless enough. Stories about breaking in Her Majesty's shoes and using dish soap to clasp a stubborn brooch. But even that stirred tension. Palace insiders whispered that then Prince Charles thought her photos were undignified, too informal for royal taste. The message was unmistakable. Even when you have permission, speaking about life behind Balmoral's doors is never truly safe. On the morning of August 4th, 2025, something eerie unfolded at Balmoral Castle. At exactly 7:30 a.m., the grand iron gates slammed shut and stayed that way. The official line from the palace was simple: storm floors, with winds reportedly reaching 90 miles per hour. But locals knew better. The storm was just a cover. Behind the scenes, nearly 2/3 of Balmoral's room attendants had walked out the night before. Their message was blunt: no more sleeping on floors, no more collapsing roofs, no more royal excuses. The following morning, thousands of tourists were turned away. It was the first time Balmoral had been forced to close its doors to the public since the 2001 foot-and-mouth crisis. By noon, rain had begun leaking through the castle's aging windows. Only 2 exhausted housekeepers stayed behind to keep things running. Barely. The revolt didn't come out of nowhere. In 2024, Maids had begun quietly posting online about the palace's harsh working conditions, accounts the royal press office scrambled to scrub. Some revealed they were ordered to clean 12 royal suites before lunch, each one filled with fragile antiques, crystal chandeliers, tartan mirrors, and centuries-old furniture. One maid said if Camilla's room wasn't spotless within 55 minutes, she'd lose her lunch break. Their pay? £10, 90 pence an hour. By the time the gates locked that August morning, many had already fled to nearby hotels for better pay and humane hours. And as history would have it, even Queen Victoria herself once wrote in her 1865 diary that she was forever short on housemaids. Over 150 years later, the walls of Balmoral were still whispering the same truth. Some things inside the monarchy never really change. Meanwhile, King Charles had a dream. Between 2023 and 2025, he poured his energy into transforming Balmoral into the ultimate model of eco-conscious living. He expanded the organic gardens, installed 30 beehives, and declared that every royal meal would be carbon neutral. It was a noble vision on paper. But behind the palace gates, that dream became a nightmare for the very people keeping it alive. The gardeners weren't allowed to use tractors. Everything had to be done by hand. Rainwater barrels replaced hoses. On a typical day, workers made nearly 90 wheelbarrow trips just to meet the king's sustainability goals. Since March 2022, one senior gardener after another had quietly resigned. Not because they didn't care about the planet, but because they couldn't survive on the palace's wages. Interviews from a 1998 university study painted a grim picture. Rain dripping through cracked slate roofs, maids waking at 6 a.m. to put on damp uniforms that left their hands covered in chilblains. 2 caught pneumonia and were promptly fired for missing work. It wasn't until 1992, after a quiet government warning, that electric heaters were finally installed. But by then, the loyal ones were gone, trading royal frostbite for hotel warmth in Inverness. Fast forward to March 9, 2024. A Balmoral housekeeper broke the silence, posting a brutal review on Indeed that went viral before the palace could bury it. She called the management toxic, accusing supervisors of yelling at staff in front of guests and docking break times over dust on picture frames. That same week, 5 maids quit in protest. Rooms sat uncleaned until nearly midnight while supervisors locked themselves in their offices, pretending nothing was wrong. Her review claimed the average pay was just £10, 90 pence an hour, around 60 pence below the UK's real living wage. Overtime past 48 hours, unpaid. Within days, ex-workers flooded the comments to back her up. The message was clear: behind Balmoral's grandeur and gold-plated gates, the staff were done keeping royal secrets, especially the ugly ones. The palace scrambled to do damage control, brushing off the accusations as isolated incidents. But leaked internal surveys told a different story. 68% of departing staff said bullying or blatant disrespect was their main reason for quitting. And speaking up, that was practically suicidal. Since 1950, royal employees have been bound by lifetime secrecy agreements, contracts so tight they silence staff long after they leave. The rules were quietly updated again in 2022, making it clear, break them and you could be sued for 6 figures. The Crown's version of hush money enforcement. Then came the October 2024 bombshell. Anonymous payroll files hit the internet, and the numbers were staggering. A senior royal aide was raking in $146,000 a year, while a palace maid earned just $19,500 and had to share a bedroom. The gap, more than 7-fold. All this while the sovereign grant, the taxpayer money funding royal life, ballooned to $85.9 million, a 41% rise in just a decade. Meanwhile, staff wages had crawled up a pathetic 6%. And this wasn't new. Back in 2003, former royal valet Paul Burrell revealed that anyone who dared to speak out was hit with legal threats within 24 hours. The message hasn't changed in 70 years. The palace doesn't negotiate with disloyalty, it crushes it. The 2024 payroll leak didn't just embarrass the palace, it reignited old battles in Parliament. Lawmakers demanded answers about pay, secrecy, and the monarchy's taxpayer funding. But there was one big catch: royal households aren't subject to freedom of information laws. That meant the maids, cleaners, and gardeners who kept the palaces running still had no real voice. No way to challenge the silence that protected the crown. And for those who dared to speak out before, the pattern was always the same: loyalty repaid with exile. Back in 1950, Marion Crawford, the devoted governess who raised young Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret, made the mistake of writing a gentle memoir after 16 years of service. She didn't spill secrets, just warm, human stories. The princesses swimming in public pools, waiting in line for the underground, behaving like ordinary children. But that small dose of honesty was unforgivable. The Queen Mother cut her off completely, stripped her of her royal cottage, and ensured her name was erased from palace memory. When Marian died in 1988, she was living under a fake name. Not a single royal attended her funeral. Then came Paul Burrell in 2003, Princess Diana's most trusted servant, the man she once called the only one I can trust. His memoir revealed the hidden truth behind Balmoral's perfect facade. The shouting matches, the letters, the pain Diana carried behind her royal smile. And just like Marian, he paid the price for telling it. In the royal world, silence isn't loyalty, it's survival. But before Burrell's tell-all made headlines, his life took a bizarre turn. In 2002, police raided his home and discovered 342 royal items, everything from letters to Diana's dresses. It looked like a scandal tailor-made for tabloids. But then came the twist. The Queen herself stepped in, telling investigators she distinctly remembered discussing those very items with him. That single statement blew the case apart. On November 1st, 2002, the charges collapsed, and Burrell walked free. His book dropped soon after, selling over 500,000 copies. Years later, he even admitted to planting a few fake details, just to throw off anyone still snooping around. Despite Charles's £1.1 billion fortune, most of the royal gardeners were earning barely £11.05 an hour, about 15% less than the national average for hospitality jobs. One worker said he lifted over 200 kilos of compost every day, eventually developing a carpal tunnel. His breaking point came when the king's handwritten notes, "Remove all chemicals by sunrise," started showing up pinned to the potting shed wall like royal decrees from another era. According to insiders, the real issue was a budget rule that capped staff wages at just 7% of the estate's total earnings. But here's the irony. After Queen Elizabeth's death, Balmoral's tourism revenue had jumped by 22%. They had more than enough money to raise wages fairly. Experts even calculated that it would cost only $187,000 a year to fix the problem, less than what was spent resurfacing the private helipad. Instead of lifting up the people who kept the king's eco-dream alive, the palace let them burn out and walk away. One by one, the maids and gardeners disappeared, leaving behind a green paradise that was starting to rot from the inside. In 2024 and 2025, Balmoral's staff turnover hit a breaking point. 38%, nearly double the normal rate for the industry. But the moment that truly made everything boil over came months earlier, in June 2023. A young maid, known only as Heather Glenn, went online and did what few royal staff ever dared to do. She spoke out. On a gossip forum, she revealed that her request for emergency leave had been denied, even though her mother was about to go into surgery. The reason? She was told she had to stay and starch Princess Kate's linens. Heather quit that very day. Her screenshots, showing she'd only used 2 out of her 10 annual leave days, spread like wildfire. Within hours, her post went viral, pulling in over 11,000 comments and sparking a wave of outrage. 2 weeks later, a new job ad quietly appeared online. It offered £10, 50 an hour, and said they needed a room attendant, immediate start. The palace claimed it was a coincidence, but insiders told a different story. After Heather's post, 5 more maids handed in their notice. Panicked, the managers scrambled to fill the gaps. They brought in temporary workers from Aberdeen, paying them £19 an hour, almost double what the loyal staff had been earning. The message was clear. Silence and dedication meant nothing. Speaking out, even once, could cost you your job, but staying quiet could cost you your dignity. That's it for today. See you in the next video. Until then, goodbye.